But bottom line is, for 800 years, these islands have been self-governing. They are autonomous. They are not part of the United Kingdom. They've also never been part of the European Union. It's effectively car-free. You cycle everywhere. The roads are not paved. I would say it's probably one of the freest places in the world, combined with it's visually absolutely stunning. Effectively, we're buying a country. And I think that's what makes this entire investment case so extraordinarily interesting.
But maybe there's an entrepreneur saying, I want to get involved on a deeper level. What's the process to actually get involved with this whole thing?
What's up? Welcome everybody back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. We are so excited to have you here for this episode. This is actually our first interview episode, and we have an excellent, exciting guest today. And I want to actually flip it over to Cody because Cody's going to do a little intro for our first guest, Swen Lorenz.
Yeah. I'm pumped to have our first guest, Swen Lorenz. And before we dive into what we're going to talk about today, I just wanted to give everybody a background. Swen and I have been friends for about a decade. I wanted to do this for years. And it just happens to be, we have a really exciting topic to discuss. But Swen and I, we met probably a decade ago in London at an investment event that you were involved in. And then over the years, you have been writing about crazy, strange, weird investments around the world. You're super well traveled. You've been into some crazy countries, gotten your nose in the middle of some seriously interesting situations. And I had been writing and doing similar things. So we just kept crossing paths over the past decade. And we've just become really good friends. And there's this trust between us that's very hard to replicate in a friendship. So I'm really glad to have you here. I'm even more excited to dive into what we're going to talk about in just a moment. But where are you today? And just tell us what you've been up to the past couple of weeks, Swen.
Hey, Cody. Hey, Austin. I'm very excited to be here. Cody, as I always joke, you're just my brother from another mother, as they say. We do very similar things. Similar, but also just simply very different. And I love being at your conference in Costa Rica, at your event recently in Costa Rica with a couple of your fellow investors and colleagues and friends. And I'm in London today. I've just come from the island of Sark, where I live, and I've flown over here from the island of Guernsey. I'm going traveling in Europe for a while, see my mother as well. And then next week I'll be back to Sark.
Perfect. Well, I feel like whenever I catch up with you, there's at least like a half hour of you just telling me where you've been to even catch up before we get to the meat and potatoes of things. So I'm sure I could dive into that for a while, but we're going to jump straight to Sark because that is the topic of today's podcast, but also it's been the topic of what you've been doing for the past couple of years. You were recently on the cover of the Financial Times. You and I were in Costa Rica recently. I also hosted a dinner with you in Miami about a year ago. And I mean, I could go on and on. It's been Sark, and many listeners probably know a little bit about it because we actually did an episode about the Weird Shit Investing Conference that you hosted a couple months back in New York City, which I also attended. And we talked about Sark there. So before we let you jump into Sark, I want to tease this out. There is an investment opportunity here for anybody listening, and it has to do with investing basically in a country. And not only is this super unique in the sense that you can invest in a country, like the founding of a country, not founding, but you're in a country, but also there's a legit investing angle here in the sense that there's an opportunity to make some a lucrative investment. So why don't we back up and just tell us a little bit about Sark, where it is, your connection with it, and then we'll dive in from there.
Yeah. So to make it really interesting, and because it's a conversation with you, Cody, someone who's very knowledgeable and with a friend, I have decided just before coming onto this podcast that I'm going to do something that I haven't done with any other journalist yet and you're not a journalist, but anyone else to whom I've publicly spoken about Sark. And I use a tagline that we've been using internally, but where I always thought, oh, that's way too politically incorrect and pushing the envelope a little too far to actually use it in public. But I thought, now is really the moment to say it out loud. And I think your podcast is the right venue for that, because we will also then go from the surface, from the headline, from the teaser straight into the subject matter. And what I'm going to say now is something I'm probably going to regret at some stage because someone will misquote me on it. But effectively, we're buying a country. There you go. That's what it boils down to. And we're not really buying a country, but we're sort of buying a country. And I think that's what makes this entire investment case so extraordinarily interesting. And there's a real estate investment angle to it, which forms the basis of it, but there's a lot more to it. And I think one of the reasons why I've decided to, it's sort of like, this is my coming out moment. So many people ask me about it or suggest to me that we could do this or that. And all I can say is that, yeah, we've thought about that. We've planned all of that already. So I think I just need to speak a bit more freely about it. And, you guys are the right chaps to make it happen with.
It's super interesting to me, Swen, because Cody initially talked to me a little bit about what you're doing. It's close to my heart because I grew up on an island. I'm actually recording this podcast from my hometown, Bainbridge Island, which is a small island up in the Pacific Northwest. And you parallel the size, it's pretty similar to the size of Sark. So I know a lot about living on an island, the realities of living on an island, what it's like to be taking the ferries, all the flights, all these different things. I would love to hear a little bit more about your kind of journey, your perspective. How did you get to Sark?
I think I have had a lifelong passion for islands, and I love the English-speaking world. So, strangely, I still have this German accent after, I left Germany 26 years ago, but I never shed my accent. I lived in the States. I've spent a lot of time in the States. I've lived in London for many, many years. And then eventually the tax regime for non-British residents of London started to get a lot worse all of a sudden. And I looked for alternatives. And there are books that are literally called 218 tax havens around the world. There's actually a book like that from the 90s. And Sark has always featured in all sorts of literature about tax havens. Because it's such a small island with just 600 residents, it never got much attention. But I went to check it out, and it's basically not too far away from London. And I like being in the British Isles, which is a geographical terms. The British Isles is bigger than the United Kingdom. And I decided to move there in a combination of its beautiful nature. It's an incredibly interesting community. It's also peaceful and quiet and like to get away from the hustle and bustle of big cities occasionally. The tax regime and the overall, government administration is very lean and friendly and humane. And there's just simply a lot of reasons why to live there. Especially right now, if I could just add one more aspect, I think it's also pretty sane. And Austin, you living in a small island, you probably have heard this saying, which I picked that up in the Galapagos Islands when I lived in South America. There is a Spanish saying about small islands and small villages on islands, which is Pueblo pequeño, infierno grande, which basically means small village, big hell. And in a small community where you know your neighbors, some things are absolutely fantastic, but you're also very exposed to everyone else who's living there. It's not like in New York or London where you close your apartment door and no one knows who you are. And that has upsides, it has downsides. It suits me very well, and I like living on small islands.
So let me just jump in here because you threw this out. We didn't really get to review it. We're buying a country. Not only is that just a cool BAM statement, but it's also in today's world something that's so, I guess, doesn't happen. You just think of the world, it's all mapped out. The borders are where they're at, and the countries are who they are, and you more or less fall into what's available. So the opportunity or idea of buying a country and being able to be a ground floor investor in this opportunity is crazy. And someone like myself who's been investing around the world for the past couple of decades, I'm like, you've never seen this before. This is so freaking cool. So I want to get clear on the location of this. Sark Island is one of the British Isles, which is close to Guernsey and Jersey. Isle of Man, I think, is up above a little bit. But all these islands off of the main UK island, where London is and everything, you're more down towards off the coast of France. Is that correct? Can you kind of just orientate us?
Correct. So Sark is one of the Channel Islands, and they are, as the name says, located in the English Channel, so between England and France. The unusual thing is that they're very, very close to France and very far away from UK and from England. So from my house, I can literally see France. And there's this old saying that the Channel Islands are fragments of France that fell into the sea and got washed ashore in England. And there's basically 1,000-year history to all of this, which we're not going into. But bottom line is, for 800 years, these islands have been self-governing. They are autonomous. They are not part of the United Kingdom. They've also never been part of the European Union. So Brexit wasn't really an issue over there. And for 800 years, they've been governing themselves. They have their own parliaments. So Guernsey has its own parliament. Jersey has its own parliament. And very unusually, Sark, with its 600 residents and a landmass that is about, I think it's, I keep forgetting my metrics, but I think it's 1.5 times the size of Central Park in New York. That has its own parliament as well. It makes its own laws. It has its own taxation system. It has its own judge and head of state and prison, the world's smallest prison. And it also has its own United Nations country code. It's getting its own internet domain. And I think probably the most evocative thing I could say in terms of getting across that it's an autonomous jurisdiction. In September, it looks like it's going to get its own flag emoji on the official emoji catalog, where it's been missing so
That's
far.
official.
That's being added.
That's official.
Yeah,
So
that's the number
what
one
more do you want?
indication of a country, the emoji flag.
So tell me this a little bit more, like on the island, right? So you mentioned 600 residents. Tell us a little bit about the breakdown of houses, real estate, residential, commercial. What does it actually look like when you're on the ground in Sark?
That's a great question. That leads us eventually to this whole question of, are we buying a country or not? And why am I saying this? So Sark is very small, as you've gathered by now. You could basically walk around it in, I think, 2.5 hours or something like that. And it only has 600 residents. So it is said that it has 330 houses, dwellings as they call them. It also has commercial real estate. It has probably 7 or 8 hotels, depending on how you count. In summer, there are up to 10 restaurants. There's a thriving, or maybe not so thriving anymore, tourism industry. People do love to visit Sark because it is car-free. The motor car was banned in the 1920s. And although there are tractors on the island for transporting stuff and carrying an ambulance trailer if needed, or doing something in terms of firefighting, it's effectively car-free. You cycle everywhere. The roads are not paved. There are no street lights. And there's just simply a very minimalist approach to governance and public administration. And I would say it's probably one of the freest places in the world. No one there speaks about libertarianism or anything like that. It's just that no one even thinks about it because it was never any different. And as I always say, my tax return is 1 page. It takes me about 20 seconds to fill it out. And that's my taxes done for the year. And you don't have to declare income or assets. And that makes for a very friendly jurisdiction, combined with it's visually absolutely stunning. And it has an interesting community. Lots of quirky characters have made their home on the island. And it's also close to Guernsey. You take the ferry over there, 35 minutes. From there, you can fly to London. Sark itself doesn't have an airport, but from Guernsey, you have a lot of flights every day. And it's a bit of a quirky outpost, a leftover from a time that's long gone. But since 459 years, it's been independently governed. And there's now the 23rd seigneur, the head of state, which is a hereditary position, and no indication that anything is going to change.
I think of land that's undeveloped or a country that you can buy, and immediately my head goes to some island in Antarctica that no one is on. But this location of Sark is not only close to one of the largest financial hubs in the world, London. It's right next to Europe. It's English speaking. It's super safe there. It's this very unique situation where it's geographically really well located and it's not screwed up. It's not like you have a crime issue there or it's like freezes over in the winter. So you combine all these things together and it's just a very interesting situation. So can you just explain to us the actual opportunity of what you're doing there, what you're buying and what that means and how much the island you can own or how that all works out?
Yeah. So I give you the bad news and the good news. I start with the bad news. We're not actually buying a country in the strictest sense of the term. What we're looking at is to buy 20% of Sark, 20% of the surface area and a slightly higher percentage of the built real estate on the island. And we have a longer term plan to up that to probably 30 or 40% of the island. So we have absolutely no intention to buy the majority of the island. But if you become such a large investor in such a tiny place, then of course you become part of, let's say, the fabric and, for lack of a better word, the planning discussion of this place. And it's really not me who's come up with the idea that you could do all sorts of innovative stuff in Sark. others have had similar thoughts. And just one example. So Sark is going to have its own internet domain. And certain jurisdictions have turned internet domains into a great business. The most famous example is probably Tuvalu, which has the internet domain .tv. So they created this domain name, and then every single TV station on the planet bought the internet domain with .tv, which was a really good business for them. Someone else, not associated with me, started that in Sark ages ago. It's been a long process. It involved getting Sark registered for its own United Nations country code, which got done. And eventually there'll be its own domain name. And I can think of at least a dozen other areas where Sark could build a legitimate, forward-thinking, lucrative business using its particular sovereign rights as something onto which you build some kind of innovative business. To give you another example, and Cody already mentioned it's a very safe place. I regularly get approached by people who say, wow, Sark is this place where you have no crime. It's English speaking. It's been politically stable for 5 centuries. I would like to store valuables there. Do you have a storage facility for valuable items? And, that's specialty real estate. And for that, you can demand a lot of rent, and that would be ideally suited for Sark. Off the back of that, you could, if you have the know-how and the license for it, you could even create financial products off the back of that. There's a lot that I can do in that sense. And if you become the largest investor in a jurisdiction where at least a good number of people are saying we need to build a digital economy around what makes Sark special, so that on the one hand, what makes Sark special is protected, but on the other hand, you're also cutting out a path forward for the island, for its economy, for its treasury, for its people, for its younger population. There's a lack of professional jobs. There's a lack of career opportunities. That has caused problems with demographics on the island. There are too many old people, young people leave. All of these possibilities are there. And in the first instance, we're just looking at buying real estate and doing a very conventional real estate investment case. But longer term, the sky is the limit with regards to here's a place that can write laws, that is part of a legitimate financial center in Western Europe. There's amazing stuff you can do. And that comes on top of our business model.
I got a couple of questions here. Very specifically, like the first one is related to what you're purchasing. All right. Can you talk a little bit about how you got like the 20% that you guys are purchasing? Where is it coming from? And 2, how does the local population relate to that purchase? And how are you integrating within the island?
So I need to give you a very, very quick primer on the last 20 years in Sark, which involved billionaire twins buying a neighboring island, which belongs to Sark jurisdictionally, but it's a separate island. They bought that and built their own castle for probably around $100 million. It was the largest house built in the British Isles in the last 200 years with cannons, etc., etc. And these 2 twin brothers then started buying up real estate on the main island of Sark and started investing into it, but probably did it in a way that was not conducive to getting a good outcome. They basically came in and wanted to tell people what to do and what they would do with the island. That caused political conflict. Eventually, there was a standoff between the twins and their family and lots of people on the island, including people in parliament. It's sort of water under the bridge from today's perspective, because one of the 2 twin brothers who was actually in charge of this, he died in 2021. And this is where this started to get interesting, the sense that Sark probably got ready for a generational change, and it needs one. So in 2015, the standoff between local population and the billionaire family was so bad that the billionaire family said, okay, we're shutting down everything. Everyone is laid off. The hotels are mothballed. The vineyards get ripped out. And basically the operation was made dormant. And obviously on an island in particular, if real estate is not lived in and used, it starts to deteriorate quite quickly. So what you're looking at now is a portfolio of real estate of which most, not all, but like a large percentage has not even been used since 2015. Some of which you just have to knock down. Other things can be refurbished, yet others are in great condition. It's a wild mixture. 2 years ago, I approached the heir and the family about wanting to purchase it. And we haven't come to a final agreement yet, but our professional advisors, our respective professional advisors are speaking to each other about the purchase. I think this is now coming to a very decisive and hopefully successful concluding phase. And this is what we're looking at. We want to buy these 20% of the island that got stuck in a political situation where everyone was a loser so far. And that, Austin, leads me straight over to your second question. And sorry, this is probably like a 5-minute primer, but it's important context and background. So on a small island, you can't ever do anything against the population. That just doesn't work. You can't go into a small community and tell them what to do. And that's why we hired a organization that is specialized in working with communities to chart a path forward when it comes to matters such as urban planning, zoning, and matters relating to sustainability and resilience. And it so happens that the King of England is, first of all, a huge fan, a personal fan for decades of urban planning and building communities. And he also has a foundation that does that sort of work. And we brought this foundation to Sark to do a first workshop. The workshop had 200 people turn up, which is about half of the adult population of the island. So, think of a high percentage of public engagement. And that public gathering resulted in an initial assessment, an objective assessment written by independent experts. What is the situation on the island right now? That was published. No big surprises in there, really. People are desiring better services, more affordable housing, all the usual things. And we want to work with the community, and we've reached out to many stakeholders. And this is very much something you can only do with the community. Will we have 100% buy-in from absolutely everyone for absolutely everything? No, that never happens either. But that's the nature of the beast. And that's where you have to navigate through the complexities of such a place as good as you can while making things happen, because Sark is stuck. Just about everyone on the island, if you ask them, would say that something has to change. And then, what has to change, that's up for debate. But Sark is just really stuck, and you see the place deteriorating, and it's not in a good position. And it is somewhat heartbreaking when you're there.
Going back to the previous topic, when you're talking about the economic opportunities of the island, I think of Estonia or Panama or a lot of these tax havens, but also these digital residency places. And then your mind wanders and thinks about the internet opportunities. And there's clearly a lot of economic opportunities for this island beyond the local, like on the ground economic production. So I don't want to jump too much into that because we could talk forever there. But what I want to understand is what the value of that land is now compared to a similar jurisdiction, say Jersey or Guernsey. Like the land that you're buying, is it a deal, or are you paying a premium for it? How does this compare to these other locations that do have these digital opportunities into the future?
We feel it's a deal primarily because of the value of very close by comparable jurisdictions. So what we're looking at buying is something that, relative to the neighboring island of Guernsey, which is half an hour by ferry, the real estate prices in Sark are only 30% to 50% those of Guernsey. So they have to go up by a factor of 2x or 3x just to catch up with Guernsey. And then you could argue that maybe Sark would deserve a valuation premium at some stage. That's up for debate. But I think the valuation gap to Guernsey, that needs to be closed eventually. And the other way to look at it is that Sark real estate costs you about as much or as little as London Zone 3 real estate. Zone 3 in London is the suburbs. So you have a place where you have a minimum in terms of taxes. You're in a financial center. You are in an amazing place to live, but it only costs maybe half or a third of what other places that are similar cost in Europe. So there's a very obvious valuation gap. And that's why we're saying in the first instance, this is a real estate investment case. We want to introduce good estate management, refurbishing properties, better management for hotels, maybe helping the island get its tourism industry back on track. And that's where you create the first doubling of the investment. Beyond that, there is a lot you can do by adding to the business case, some of the stuff that I've described earlier and a lot more. But in the first instance, we're saying, okay, what could we lose here? And I think the worst case scenario is we get stuck with this, and we've run a lot of numbers on this. And we believe once we've refurbished this, if we get stuck and if we get nowhere for whatever reason, then effectively this is going to throw off about an 8% yield per anno rate, rising to 10% after a couple of years. That's for a worst case scenario, not too bad. And in a best case scenario, longer term, think blue sky potential, think of the businesses you can build there and what it will do to real estate prices. There's plenty of upside, but it needs to be exploited step after step. And I'm an operations person. I don't want to overpromise. We're doing this in phases, and the first phase is real estate.
So when I have my investor hat on, I think immediately land banking, which is this idea of putting your money into land. And it's pretty popular in the US, which is you put your money, you buy land outside of a major metropolitan area, and you feel comfortable owning that land because over time, more things will be developed. And with inflation, by the time you want to sell that land, say it's 10, 20 years down the road, you've basically banked your money in an inflation adjusted asset, which is this land. In the case of Sark, it sounds like, again, from my investing perspective, there is a discount on the land because all the things, the potential the island has, that's potential, that's a future. What you're buying now is this kind of, outdated island, and that's why it's cheap. So for an investor, parking their money there is, even if the island didn't develop, you're still kind of hedging your bet into the future in the sense that the land will probably be worth more just from value of land. And then you throw in the opportunity of, hey, we can develop these businesses, we can do these offshore type commerce with other people, and then you start to think like, whoa, this could be a really exciting investment. Is that like the basics of how an investor should look at this?
That's a great way to look at it. And in the portfolio, there's 140 acres of land, some of which will be, not very much ever, but other parts of it are very interesting for potential future use. The way how I see it is that it's almost like an alternative way of going short the UK, is how someone has put it recently. So the UK, obviously, on the one hand, it's the world's, is it the fourth largest or fifth largest economy, but it has obvious issues right now, not made any better by the recent change in government. And a lot of people are currently considering to move from the UK over to the Channel Islands, which means Guernsey, Jersey, and Sark. And these islands effectively have no government debt. They have no political parties. They're much more sane and safe than the UK mainland. So these places are going to do well one way or another. It'd be very difficult to screw this up. And owning land in a place like that, I think that's a highly desirable hard asset to put into your portfolio. It's in a way a protected asset with limited downside. There's huge upside in the long run. And we're going to unlock that over the course of 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. I'm turning 50 next year. This is quite possibly the most exciting thing I've worked on in my life. It's also the most high profile thing. As Cody mentioned, I've been on the Financial Times cover page with that. So I really must not screw that up. And I want to, make the best of this opportunity to leave something behind that was great for investors, not just simply a very positive thing to leave behind where people say, wow, they pulled off an amazing feat here and created what I ultimately believe will be one of the world's best places to live in. And not to be forgotten, I live there. So whatever I do there, I have to, be responsible for that on a daily basis because I bump into people there as soon as I leave the house.
Skin in the game.
And of course, I've got skin in the game in multiple ways.
It's very interesting to me. I mean, when Cody first brought it up, like I said, I grew up on an island, so I'm familiar with kind of the feeling of what it's like to live on an island. And I think one of the things that's interesting is there's just not that many waterfront islands that are close to large cities that are available to live on. And there's nothing that is, I think if you look long term, there's no time in the future when people will not want to live near the ocean. It's a wonderful lifestyle to be able to see and feel the ocean nearby and have that experience where you're like living in nature. Then not to mention not being near cars. I mean, that's a next level of peace that very few people have even experienced. The moment that you get away, and I've been on a couple islands where there's car free, it's so much more peaceful. One of my questions, as it is a desirable place to be, what are some of the risks that you see from, let's say, like the British government or other countries looking at it as a place that they might want to rein back in? Do you see anything like that? Or what are some of the risks that you see being a resident there that you're kind of like looking out for?
So the first risk that the media always asks about is politics. The famous question, what do the locals think and what does local politics do? I would say that is something that, first of all, that's the case in any jurisdiction where you invest into real estate. There's always a situation with neighbors and the community that you need to take into consideration. That's something you can manage. And there are very well-established ways of managing that for everyone's benefit. So it's not rocket science. This is being done by, developers all over the place. So I don't consider that to be a major issue, really. I think the biggest risk is execution risk. This is a place with enormous complexity. Very simply, it starts with the fact it's a somewhat remote island and you have to ship everything in. So if you wanted to do some major real estate redevelopment there, everything needs to be shipped in. That includes probably the workforce, because right now there's a worker shortage there, like in many other places. And we have issues such as the electricity company, the Sark electricity company, seems to be on its last leg. We have more and more electricity outages. Last Sunday, we had several of them in short order, and that killed my washing machine and the appliances of multiple other people on the island. So
I grew up with that as well. I'm very familiar with grew up with a generator trying, the power would go out. So I'm familiar with that sort of a thing.
It's a reality, and it's one of the many, many complexities that you need to manage in a place that is a remote, small island with its own system. And we believe that living there and having many local partners, for example, the most experienced contractor on the island is someone we'll be working with, of course, and we'll hire as many locals as possible. We've got an entire management team lined up already of people who already live on the island. So we're on top of these things, but it is a risk, and we feel it's well managed now on our side, or it's under control, because we've worked on this for 3 years and we've put about £500,000, so something like $700,000 into this in terms of prep work. And that's just money at risk. That was our seed money. So I think that's under control. And what you mentioned, the risk of the British government or someone else stepping in. The Channel Islands, including Sark, have a relationship with the Crown, first and foremost. And we have a relationship with the King's Foundation, which is that urban planning organization that I mentioned earlier, who we have hired and will continue to hire for public engagement work and for very important work, such as creating a local architectural code, a local style. So we feel we're doing as much engagement and preparation and communication on that front as we can. There's also the UK and the Department of Justice. The DOJ in the UK is overseeing these various overseas territories, and they come in all shapes and sizes. They're the so-called crown dependencies, such as the Channel Islands, and there's the overseas territories, and there are a couple of other names. And the Department of Justice oversees all of them. As far as I know, and I think I'm reasonably well informed, the core, at the very heart of the position of the DOJ is the mantra that nothing should change, because these places have essentially not changed for hundreds of years. And when it comes to their governance, the motto is just don't change anything, because this has been working reasonably well for hundreds of years. And if you change something in one place, they need to change it in all the other overseas territories as well. And that's where it gets very complicated. The Channel Islands are actually also really well-governed places. So, they're obviously financial centers, but they were never among the bad tax havens. They've always been on the so-called OECD whitelist. So they've always been among the accepted and well-governed financial centers. The Moneyval organization, that is the international body for evaluating anti-money laundering legislation and governance. Moneyval has just been to Jersey and gave Jersey a clean bill of health. They've also just been to Guernsey, and I expect that this will come out all right. So there's really no reason for anyone to come crashing down on the Channel Islands as a whole, or on that tiny speck called Sark, which is too small for anyone to even really register anyway.
I want to know about the demand here, because I think you just went over the challenges of growing up on an island. Austin, you're on an island growing up. I grew up in a pretty small community. It was like a very long drive just to the grocery store. So it's not for everybody. Let's just be real. Like, this is not a lifestyle for everybody. But right next to Sark is London, massive city. I don't know the population there. What is it? 5-10 million people?
8 million in London itself. Greater London is 15 million.
Okay. Huge population there. Then you got France, you got Paris. You've got this, an enormous population base in the direct vicinity. And that's not even considering people from around the world that may find this interesting. So I've got to imagine that, you have a relatively small island. There's going to be enormous demand from people that want to physically move there and live there. Again, I know it's not for everybody, but just on the numbers basis, we're talking, this could be overwhelming. So I know this isn't official out in the world yet in terms of, hey, come to Sark, you can move there, but I'm sure you're getting people knocking on your door. Can you explain anything about that?
See, Cody, this is why I wanted to have that conversation with you, because you get it. Everyone else is always asking me, oh, how will you get people to move to Sark? And like, we have a waiting list. So even now, I get emails every single day from multiple people who are asking me, if I invest into your project, can you give me a house? Can I live there? Do I get a visa? And it's not quite that easy. So we are in this very peculiar situation that there are 70 million people, at least, who have a right to live in Sark without a visa, which is everyone who's British or Irish. If you have one of these passports, you can move to Sark tomorrow, no questions asked, no paperwork. All you need to do is find a place to live, which, is a bit difficult, but not impossible. There's also always something available somewhere. Where it has become a lot easier is for anyone who's not British or Irish. So until 2021, anyone with a European Union passport could move to Sark in the same way, no questions asked. But with Brexit, all of that immigration stuff was reset in the British Isles. And for anyone who's not British or Irish, you basically need a visa. Either you need to get a job, which is difficult on Sark because there's only tourism. You need to marry someone, possible, and or you need to set up a business and create 2 local jobs and invest about $250,000. That's also possible. There's an entrepreneur visa,
and that's right now today. That's what currently exists, and that's not considering any changes that may happen in the future.
No, so there is an existing entrepreneur visa which allows anyone from anywhere in the world to move there if they set up a business in Sark, of which they own the majority and which creates significant economic advantages for the island, which is generally interpreted as 2 jobs for locals. So that's not even overly difficult. So it means anyone who wants to come in really can come in if they want to. But the extraordinary thing when you think about it is that here's an island with 600 people and it's a desirable place. And then you have this body of people, which is basically 70 million who have a right to live there, provided they find a place. So I've been saying for 5 years to Sark that, you guys need to think about long-term planning and immigration laws and things like that, because one day it will become overwhelming. And I think we've now entered that phase. And right now there's a certain danger that Sark will one day be just a place for rich people, which is not what I want, because you need to have you need to have everyone on an island to make the place work. But we only need very, very few people to want to move to Sark. And because it is an iconic place and many people know it, and because it's got character and it's got all sorts of attractions, there is no shortage. And that's before we've even started to really promote the place, which we've barely done.
If you kind of break down the island as it stands, like groceries, all the stuff that you need to kind of just live your life. I think I was reading there was one grocery store, but can you give kind of a picture of like, of those 600 people that are living there now, what are the things that Sark does well that you're able to completely do on island? And then what are the things that you got to go off island, or, like plumbing, stuff like that, anything like that? Like what are the things that need to be brought into Sark to be able to make it more desirable to live?
So the question I always get is, does Amazon deliver there? And it kind of makes me laugh. Of course, we've got the Royal Mail and we've got even DHL and UPS. They all deliver there. It's not a problem at all. We have a supermarket and what you could describe as a sort of corner shop on the island as well. They're very happy to order anything for you that you want. It takes a couple of days to get there, but you can get it. And so my girlfriend, for example, is vegan. She has, we regularly go to Guernsey on the ferry for a day of shopping because specialty items you can more easily find on Guernsey, of course. And that is the case in any small island community. The island doesn't have anymore a hairdresser. There is no one to do your nails. You have to go to the neighboring island to get a tattoo. If you want to go to a barber, that's a neighboring island as well. There's no dentist. We do have a doctor. So if you hack your arm off while chopping firewood, the doctor will stitch it back on and then you're sent off the island with an ambulance boat. Many things are on the island, but many things we also don't have. My biggest frustration is we don't have a gym. So I've built a little bit of a gym in my house, but there's nothing like actually going to a gym and being among other people and working out together and, loud music.
So it's a pitch for somebody who wants to start a gym. They can go there. You'll create jobs.
Yeah, I mean, you're joking, but I mean, to give you a real life example, there is a yoga group on the island. And I spoke to the lady a while ago who does the yoga group. She organizes, and she says it's really frustrating because there are so few young women, and it's mostly young women who do yoga on the island to keep a yoga group going. Nothing. It's just, there's no critical mass for most things. And that includes a gym, a yoga group, many other social groups. And the island clearly needs more people. How many is up for debate, but it needs more people.
Yeah, we need less of Swen doing down dog in the prairies of Sark Island. So Swen, I have a question on the investment part of all this, because as an investor myself, this is an unfamiliar process for me, because in the US, you cannot publicly talk about private investments, especially something like this where you're getting down to the numbers and actually what's going on and how investors can get involved. But I think this is different. So can you explain the situation there? And then let's dive into the actual investment thesis, or not thesis, the actual, like, what are the numbers? How can somebody get involved? What does this mean? And what is the near term future for this project?
Yeah. So to cut right through the chase when it comes to the regulatory aspect of the investment. So I also run a licensed financial services provider in Guernsey. That's my main job. And I'm very, very familiar with anything that comes to marketing of financial products or creating them in the first place. And the great thing about this particular project is that we've managed to create something that is, on the one hand, done to the highest of standards when it comes to governance and the quality of service providers we have. And for example, we are going to publish a official prospectus for this project, which will be registered with the Financial Services Authority. However, we are a so-called unregulated investment scheme, which means we have no problem at all speaking about this publicly, accepting money from anywhere in the world. You need to make sure that in the jurisdiction where you are allowed to subscribe to that. But that's not our problem. We just have to do KYC, know your customer, due diligence on our end, and make sure that the source of your money is kosher. With that said, it is relatively simple. The only real restriction we have is we have to ask for a minimum investment, which is really £25,000, which is about $32,000. We can't go any lower than that because we're not allowed to deal with retail investors, as the technical term goes. That's the technical aspect. So anyone can look at our deck and then look at our prospectus and our subscription form, and they will see that we have the largest law firm of Guernsey working for us. We have the UK's largest or number one rated auditing firm working for us. We have one of the best fund administration businesses on the island. So everything is really done in a way where we're over and above any doubt. In terms of the actual investment case, we're doing now what I call Series A. So my company and together with my colleagues, I've taken care of the seed funding. We have put about £500,000, about $700,000 into creating the plan, analyzing the opportunity and putting in place all sorts of building stones so that when or if it happens, we get off to a quick start. Now we're raising £30 million for Series A. £30 million is $36 million times 1.2. And we are currently at 22 million. We have made a slight change. We have been offered on very advantageous terms, in our view, bridge financing of 10 million from one investor. So we're adding a portion of debt to the entire equation. So we're basically raising 20 million of equity and 10 million of debt. I'd like to think that someone offering us 10 million of financing, that's a local firm who are very, very familiar with the landscape in the Channel Islands. I think that's a huge endorsement of our plan. Again, we've spoken to them for close to 2 years. So this didn't happen overnight. This has been planned with a very long lead time. And we've now raised 12 million in equity. So we need another 8 million pounds of equity. So that's about $10 million. And in the next weeks, I'm going to, put my nose to the grind wheel to speak to all the people who've previously expressed their interest, and also to some new people, hopefully coming from your podcast as well, about closing that last remaining funding gap. So if you look at it from the perspective of we want 30 million, we have 22 lined up, equity and debt. That's 73%. So we're missing 27%. Usually once you pass the 50% mark, finding the rest of the money is just a matter of speaking to more people. The investment thesis clearly works. We have a very high profile anchor investor, Harris Kupperman, who's probably one of the world's best hedge fund managers. He's made 10x his money since 2019 for his clients. He's also joined the board of directors. He's already registered as a director. And we feel we've got some very exciting building blocks in place.
So as far as investors go, obviously you need the capital to make the offer to purchase this land, but you also want a group of investors who understand the long-term vision here, who are patient investors, and hopefully have a similar worldview and understanding, hey, this is a place where we're patient. We're not expecting overnight, millions to be made. And we have a backing of financial backing, but a backing of people that are stewards of Sark as well, speak well about it, are able to tell the story properly, and hopefully visit every now and then to stimulate the local economy. Yes,
and we've really got members of both of these groups. We've got people who've only contributed capital, which is super welcome. And it is a good investment case. We also have people who say, I want to put money into this and eventually get involved in one or the other way. And that ranges from someone simply saying, okay, once you've refurbished some of these properties, I would like to rent one of them and I want to move to the island. That's the very basic case, and I get a lot of that. We also have some very interesting people indeed among our investors. Just yesterday, I signed up, can't say the name, but a globally known software entrepreneur who has a passion for online education. And he has read, after reading our deck, he's read about the school in Sark having all sorts of issues relating to education on the island and looking at online education right now. And he wants to help with that and sees it as potentially a model case that the rest of the world could be inspired by and learn from. We have entrepreneurs who want to bring businesses to the island, including some people who've already given us very exciting ideas for the sort of add-on to our business model, things that we could do using the sovereign status of Sark. And last but not least, we just have a great bunch of people who you want to hang out with. And I mean, just yesterday, I had visitors on the island who came from the Netherlands just to have seen it. They've already said, we're going to invest. And then they said, we're so curious, we're coming over just for that, for one day. We want to have a look at it. And there's a great little community in the making. And hopefully, obviously, some of them eventually moving there, becoming part of the community. I brought a lot of people over there in 2020 already. One or two of them are now in parliament. Some of them are working as volunteers for the first responders of the ambulance. This works on so many levels, and that's what makes it so exciting.
I can totally see from the perspective of, all right, I want to invest and then potentially get involved and move there or whatever. For somebody who's just investing capital, what's kind of your runway and like the plan for them to get a return in the future? What does that look like in your kind of vision for the future of Sark?
So in the first instance, we have set as a goal that after 3 or 4 years, we want to have doubled the money of our investors, at the very least, basically. And it could very well be more than that. And very importantly, after about 2 years, we want to take this company public. So Series A is really only the first step to buy this particular portfolio. Once we have that portfolio, we want to raise Series B and buy more assets. And there are more assets on the island for sale. There's a backlog of inheritance cases, and there are probably some businesses that are for sale. I think the electricity company needs a bit of investment. We'll be looking at that as well. And as part of that, we have already been holding discussions with investment banks about wanting to take the company public, both to create a liquidity event for our investors, but also because we're very serious about transparency and governance standards. And what's more transparent than a publicly listed company where anyone could buy a share or two and go to the general meeting? And that's the sort of level of transparency we aspire to, with a side benefit for our early investors. And I mean, really, Series A is the ground floor opportunity. They will have the biggest and the quickest uplift, assuming that our plans work out. And they will also have the opportunity after probably not too long to, if they want to sell their stocks on the stock market, or at least have a daily valuation and look at it lovingly in their portfolio and see, I did very well buying this 2 years ago.
This must be a dream, Swen, to be able to raise money and be able to develop an island that you live on.
It's a dream. It's also, I mean, like I said earlier, Pueblo Pequeño Inferno Grande. If you're in the daily battle of it, I'd say the amount of paperwork and the regulatory stuff and the stakeholder management and making things work before you've, even bought the assets, that is, I wouldn't call that a dream. That's just simply hard work. And my girlfriend could tell you that, I'm basically nowhere to be seen because I'm usually hiding behind my laptop doing work. But it is great fun. It's quite possibly the most interesting, maybe impactful thing I've done in my life. or will be doing in my life. So I do take this very serious, and I'm very excited about it. And it's great fun to, tell the story. You can see this is a story that really captivates people. And to refer to it one last time, I've never been before on the cover page of the Financial Times. We've had so much media in the meantime, for one reason or another, that I couldn't say it's not exciting.
If you think about kind of into the future and you're developing this thing and you create a thriving Sark, how many people live on the island and what does that look like?
So right now we have about 600. I would make 2 points with very strong convictions. And I say this from the perspective of someone who, in all modesty, will now claim that I probably know more about real estate in Sark than most other people, because we've been looking at this for so long. What even most people who live on the island don't realize is that even by just utilizing the existing real estate stock on Sark, and there's a lot of deserted, derelict real estate, there are unfinished construction sites, etc., etc. Even if you just finished what you have on the island already, not adding a single additional square foot of concrete to the ground, you could easily have 1,200 people on the island. So you'd be doubling the population. And I think it's almost a bit of a crime that in a place where currently, some people are getting priced out of their housing market, there's not enough housing stock. I know very concretely of one young family leaving now because they can't find something, and really young families is something you really want to keep on an island like that. It's terrible to have all this derelict housing and real estate on the island. So you can take it to 1,200. And then the other thing that I will say is, and that's really me quoting the world's leading experts, any urban planner, any town planner will tell you that for a community to be sustainable, and that's not in the political term, but for a community to function, you need about 1,200 households generally. And a household in the Western world is 2.4 people. So 1,200 households takes you to 2,500 people. Then you can adjust that figure, how many people are on the island at any given time, because if you live on a small island, you travel a disproportionate amount, or some people do at least. Some people may not want to be there in winter. It's certainly not 600. It's also not 5,000, and it's not 10,000, but it's probably a low multiple of 600. And that would have to change over, 10 years, 20 years, certainly not overnight. It has to be done very, very carefully, because you don't want to spoil what makes Sark so special. And the rural landscape, the quietness, the nature, the birds, all of that stuff, that needs to be off limit.
When I look at it from an outside perspective, it's one of the first things that comes to mind. Like I said, grew up on an island that tourism is a big part of. And then I've spent a lot of time up in the smaller islands in the Pacific Northwest called the San Juan Islands, which they expand massively during the summertime. And you've got tourists coming in, visiting, it's similar landscape. They come for the nature. They come for the beautiful walks. How do you see tourism evolving in Sark? And where do you feel like the capacity may be for people coming in for, let's say, day travel or overnight? What does that look like?
That's a very important question in the context of this entire investment proposition and project, because in that portfolio are 5 of the 7 or 8 hotels on the island. And it's always a bit difficult to count. So I say 5 hotels, but one has actually burned down. So there's nothing left of it except for a building permit. One has to be torn down if so derelict. And the third one is in such bad condition that I am not 100% sure we can even refurbish it. So there's really only 2 functioning hotels in the portfolio right now. But tourism has been a mainstay of the Sark economy forever, basically. You can probably go back 100 years at least. But it's been in decline. And why has it been in decline? Because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, people from the UK, from the mainland, went to the Channel Islands because it was a great place to go on holiday. There were golden beaches. It was a bit warmer, more hours of sunshine. And it was also close enough so you could go on a ferry. In the 80s and 90s, suddenly Europe had better flight connections, cheaper airlines, discount airlines, EasyJet. Suddenly you can fly for very little money to Spain, get guaranteed sunshine. It's a lot cheaper. And if you don't fly to Spain, you can fly to Portugal or Turkey, which is cheaper still. And you have basically all the facilities of a very modern and very professional tourism infrastructure. In Sark, everything is a bit stuck. It does feel in many ways like the tourism industry hasn't really moved forward enough since, certainly decades. Visitor numbers have been going down, but not just that. it's also the spending per visitor has gone down. And I just the other day spoke to a restaurant owner on the island who told me that, so many guests are now ordering tap water instead of drinks that they have to pay for. Tap water is for free. And you realize that Sark is not just going downhill in terms of visitor numbers long term, but there's also just simply the spending per visitor. And there's the so-called T and P tourist, which is the tourist who comes on a boat as a day tripper, walks around, has a cup of tea, uses the facilities, T and P, and then buggers off again and maybe buys a souvenir. And these are not high value tourists. And the island is visibly struggling. You go there and I mean, the main drag, the avenue as it's literally called, does look like a third world place. And that's a sign of a tourism industry that is not doing well. It can be revived. You could introduce more offers in terms of wellness and health. Events could take place. There are conference facilities on the island, but right now the whole place just simply doesn't stack up because of this crisis it's been in. And a lot of it can be fixed and there are a lot of quick wins you could introduce, but something needs to be done.
Yeah, I see a lot of other investing opportunities. Obviously, you're raising the money to purchase a portion of the island. But one of the conversations I've had with you in the past is to have certain businesses in a society, you need a certain population. And you had mentioned the bakery, a baker. A baker needs a certain amount of households to operate. Otherwise, they're just not selling enough bread every day to make a living. And I forget what that number is. I think it was like 2,000 people or something for a baker. But I'm sure there's other jobs or industries out there, whether it's a barber or things like that, service industries, service opportunities on the island that simply cannot survive, which will likely be needed in the near future as you bring more people to this island. And I keep going back to there's 70 million people you're telling me who can move there. It's one of those, if you just take a fraction of a fraction of a fraction percentage, then the island will be full. So I see a lot of opportunities for investors there. So if you're listening to this and someone's thinking, okay, I don't have $32,000 to invest, or I have $1 million to invest, but maybe there's an entrepreneur saying, I want to get involved on a deeper level. How do they go about this? They just reach out to you? Is there a way to reach out to people on the island? What's the process to actually get involved with this whole thing?
I think visiting is really always step number one. Of course, people can send me emails and I get a lot of emails of this nature and I try to answer them sensibly. But honestly, if you are interested enough in this to be considering it seriously, then visit. It's a stunning and interesting place to visit. It's also not that difficult. You just need to get to London. And then from London, you can, basically you need 48 hours in your diary. And that gives you the opportunity to explore both Guernsey and Sark in 48 hours. And you get a much better lay of the land. I do find that almost anyone who's ever come to Sark told me two things. First of all, the place is much bigger than they thought. Once I've walked them around for a couple of hours and I tell them they've just seen, like a fifth of the island, they say it's so much bigger. And the other thing is they say it's so much more beautiful than they expected. You need to like the vibe of the place and you need to have a feeling that this is something you could really call home. You need to be more than just a casual visitor. You need to really make this your home if you want to run a business there. But then the opportunity is that you could bring almost any business to Sark because there is just so little there right now. Yeah, yes, we have someone producing honey, someone does chocolate and someone does gin, but there are so many niches where there's no business currently. And that's before you've just even started to think a bit more about digital businesses, offering career opportunities on the island. Doing mail order businesses from Sark. All of that can be done. Really, there's no limit to the imagination. And I don't think that can be done over a couple of emails. Someone needs to visit and have a careful think about it, then maybe stay a week or two and explore the lay of the land, just like with any other country that you would, consider to move to.
Just to share a little anecdote, I was just up in Orcas Island, which is an island up in the San Juan Islands for the last 3 weeks, and we had a plumbing issue. Plumbing was backed up, sink was backed up, and I, started taking it apart, found out that we needed a snake to go down there and unplug it. Had the neighbor come over, we snaked it together, couldn't get it fixed. And so we need like a legit plumber. Called the plumber on the island, one of the two plumbers on the island. And again, this is an island much larger than Sark. Called one of the plumbers. It was a Sunday. We get a call back on Monday. And the plumber's like, I'm sorry, but we are booked out for the next 3 months. Every single day booked out. There's that much demand. And to your point about bringing different businesses to an island, obviously Sark is smaller, but when you create a business, a service business on an island where you're the only game in town, things end up, you end up creating like these people have a thriving business on a small island up on Orcas Island because they're the only game in town.
I know a lot about this because I've spent so much time with you, Swen, talking about everything. And also I'm going to be an investor. So I've definitely done the deep dive. I want to revisit this in the future because, I want to remind everyone too that this is the very first investing opportunity. This isn't like Series B, C, whatever. This is the very beginning of this entire process. So this story is just beginning. I know 2-3 months from now, we're going to have a lot more to talk about, but I think it's also important for investors to know, if you want to do this, you got to do this now. I think 3-4 years from now, it's very easy for me to see, hey, this land holding is publicly listed. It's much more widely known about within the population of people who are interested in a investment like this. And that's not even counting the population who's interested in the lifestyle of that, of living on Sark. So for me as an investor, I'm looking down the road going, this is a very attractive opportunity here. But I know the story is going to change in the coming months. So I think we're good now. We can close off this conversation for the time being and hopefully revisit this in the next couple of months after we see how this fundraise goes. So to leave this off, how do people get a hold of you, Swen? Do they send a carrier pigeon to us and then we send smoke signals to you? Like how does somebody say, hey, Swen, I want in on this deal?
They could just send me an email and then I'll send them the deck that tells the story of this entire investment case, which is also just simply an interesting read in its own right, even if you don't want to invest. Why don't we just simply put my email address underneath your podcast, and people can also very simply find me, through Google, LinkedIn, all of these channels. Should we mention maybe West Palm Beach as well?
Yeah, we can do that. We're Swen and I are going to host a dinner in November 14th in Palm Beach here in the area where I'm located, and we're going to have actually some of my investors who met you and are now going to partake in the Sark investment. They're going to come there, and I think there's going to be some other people from Florida and some other people from the U.S. are going to fly in because they want to meet with you, talk with you, and to learn more about Sark. So that's November 14th. We will have more information about that very soon, but that'll be a good opportunity for anybody to meet you, Swen, in person and shake your hand and realize you're a real human being that is not taking their money.
What's your best resource to send them to learn more about? They book a flight to London? Can they go? You said 48 hours. It's a flight from Gatwick, right, to Gurney?
Yes. So I think the number one website for them to take a look at is sark.co.uk, which is the website of Sark Tourism. It's an excellent resource. They've got everything on there that you need to know. And in practical terms, once you are in London, so imagine you land in London, you overnight. The next morning, you take a flight from London Gatwick on the national airline of Guernsey, which is called Aurigny. And you fly to Guernsey. They've got 5 flights a day. And after you land there, you take the public ferry to Sark. During summer, they run several times a day. And you should probably overnight in Sark. And then the following day in the evening, you're back in London. And I can help I'm actually just putting together a short document about how to plan the perfect quick trip to Sark, because I have a lot of requests and I'm so far guiding them personally. I'm always providing individual input to travel planning, but I'm maxed out with my capacity. So I'll have a document about that ready very, very shortly.
Swen, really pleasure to meet you. And it was very, very interesting. And we will continue to keep in contact, and we're excited to follow this along. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks, Cody. Been a pleasure. And no doubt I'm going to see you both somewhere in the world very soon on some island from the sounds of it.
Absolutely.